January 1st, New Year's Day, somewhere in the Caribbean Sea. At 0612 local time, the water is almost perfectly calm. Visibility is clear, the wind is light, and the horizon looks exactly the way any sailor would want it to look on the first morning of a new year. Open, quiet, and predictable. There are no major weather systems nearby, no heavy commercial traffic, no signs of pressure building in the area. Ahead, a U.S. Navy carrier strike group continues on a steady course through international waters. This is not an emergency movement, not a public display, and not a confrontation mission. It is a scheduled transit, documented, lawful, and routine. Flight activity is limited, sensors are active, but the overall posture remains calm. Then, without warning, the situation begins to shift. On surface search radar, 5 new contacts appear within minutes of one another. They are not spread out randomly. They are moving as a group. Their speed is steady. Their direction is purposeful. Inside the Combat Information Center, the contacts are flagged immediately. These are not cargo ships. They are not Coast Guard patrol craft. They are Venezuelan naval vessels. The contacts are confirmed through visual and electronic identification. Their hull shapes match known Venezuelan surface units. Their courses are plotted. Their closest point of approach is calculated, and the numbers do not look like coincidence. Instead of keeping a safe distance, the Venezuelan ships begin making small course adjustments. At first, the changes are subtle. 5 degrees, 10 degrees. Not much to the eye, but enough to change the geometry, enough to close the gap. This is no longer simple observation. This is positioning. From the bridge of the U.S. Navy ship on the edge of the formation, the watch team understands the pattern right away. No one raises their voice, no one rushes. The response follows procedure. Maintain speed, maintain course, document everything. Radio calls are sent over international maritime frequencies in both English and Spanish. The U.S. formation identifies itself and states that it is conducting a lawful transit through international waters. The message is professional, measured, and clear. No answer comes back. The Venezuelan ships continue on their course. At this range, every mile matters. Every knot matters. The lines on the plotting table begin to tighten. The closest point of approach drops from double digits into single digits. Still, the U.S. formation does not make a dramatic move. No public alarm, no visible escalation, but the posture changes. Surface radar shifts into a more detailed tracking mode. Electro-optical systems begin following individual ships. Signals are recorded, bearings are time-stamped, every movement is preserved. This is where gray zone encounters happen, not in dramatic moments, but in spacing, timing, and restraint. 5 Venezuelan naval vessels now form a loose arc ahead of the carrier strike group. It is not a solid barrier, at least not yet, but it is enough to complicate movement. Enough to send a message. They are close enough to be seen with the naked eye, and they remain silent. No radio response, no explanation, no acknowledgement. For the U.S. Navy, silence is not empty. Silence is information. It suggests planning. It suggests intent. Inside the strike group, commanders begin evaluating purpose, not emotion. Venezuela cannot match the capability in front of it, and they know that. Everyone involved knows that. So this is not about overpowering the formation, it is about provoking a decision. Blocking without crossing the line is a classic pressure tactic. It creates risk while staying just below the level of open confrontation. It challenges the other side to react sharply, to change course first, to become the side that appears to raise the stakes. But the carrier strike group does not turn away. The formation holds its line, because in moments like this, one rule matters above all others. The first side to lose discipline also risks losing control of the story. Minutes pass. The Venezuelan ships tighten their spacing. One vessel moves slightly ahead, testing the distance. Another adjusts speed, trying to narrow the approach angle. Every change is careful. Every move is recorded. Above the waterline, there is no chaos. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, no visible aggression. Just 5 ships, a narrowing sea lane, and a carrier strike group refusing to be pulled out of position. But below the surface of that calm morning, every sensor is fully alert, and command teams are already thinking several moves ahead. The U.S. Navy has seen this kind of pressure before, and it understands exactly what the moment demands. The question is no longer who appears more forceful. The question is, who can remain steady when the space begins to close? Because once an attempt to block a carrier strike group begins, it usually ends in one of 2 ways. Either the formation changes course, or the ships trying to influence it discover very quickly that position alone does not control momentum. And that realization is approaching faster than Venezuela expects. At 0624 local time, the geometry tightens again. The 5 Venezuelan vessels are no longer distant contacts sitting at the edge of the radar picture. Their headings begin to come together in a deliberate pattern. Small course changes build into a formation that every surface warfare officer would recognize. This is controlled interference. One ship moves slightly ahead of the others, offset just enough to affect the forward path of the carrier strike group. Two more shifts sideways, widening the shape in front of the formation. The remaining pair stay a little farther back, positioned to close any opening if the U.S. ships respond. No individual movement looks extreme on its own, but together the message is clear. The closest point of approach drops again. From the U.S. perspective, this is the most sensitive stage of a gray zone encounter. Not because an open confrontation has started, but because the risk of miscalculation is rising. Radio calls are repeated, calm, precise, and fully recorded. Still, there is no reply. The Venezuelan ships are now close enough that deck crews can be seen through long-range optics. No visible signals are raised, no dramatic gestures are made, no explanation is offered, there is only movement. Inside the Combat Information Center, watch teams update the surface picture in real time. Bearings, speed, rate of closure. Every detail is tracked, logged, and checked against the last movement. Nothing is guessed. Intent is judged only by behavior. And the behavior is difficult to misread. This is not simple shadowing. This is not an escort. This is an attempt to influence the movement of the formation. The carrier strike group does not slow down. It does not turn away, because that is exactly what this tactic is designed to achieve. A sharp course change could be presented as a reaction under pressure. A reduction in speed could be framed as hesitation. Either one would give the other side the story it wants. So the response is restraint, visible, deliberate, complete. As the distance continues to close, U.S. sensors quietly move into a more focused posture. Surface radar sharpens its picture. Electro-optical systems track individual hull markings. Electronic support teams listen carefully, cataloging every signal, every radar sweep, and every brief exchange between the Venezuelan ships. The silence from the other side becomes useful in its own way. It points to coordination. It points to command control. It suggests this was not a spontaneous encounter, but a planned move. The Venezuelan lead ship edges closer, reducing the lateral space. Its wake stretches longer behind it, showing an increase in speed. Seconds later, another vessel mirrors the adjustment. The arc begins to compress. To an untrained observer, it might look like a small change. To experienced crews, it is a clear increase in pressure. Still, there is no visible disorder inside the U.S. formation. No rushed movement, no unnecessary display. But readiness tightens behind the scenes. Aviation crews are placed on shorter notice. Helicopter teams are briefed. Cameras keep recording. Legal and operational documentation continues at the same time. This is the modern maritime environment, where proof can matter as much as presence. The Venezuelan tactic is straightforward. Apply enough pressure to force a course change, while staying below the level that would justify a stronger response. But pressure works in both directions. The closer they move, the more information they reveal. Their maneuvering habits, their spacing discipline, their reaction timing, their coordination, their command structure. Every part of it is being captured. At 06:33, one Venezuelan ship slips slightly out of alignment. Only a few degrees, only for a short moment, but long enough to reveal a gap in the formation. It is subtle, but it is noticed. That single moment shows something important. This is not a sealed barrier. It is a demonstration, and demonstrations have limits. The U.S. formation continues forward, steady and unbroken. No additional statements are made beyond the standard radio calls. No gestures are used for effect. No unnecessary movement is given to the cameras. The message is delivered through consistency alone. You do not control this space. You do not decide the route. You do not determine the outcome. The minutes drag on, and the Venezuelan ships are now facing a decision they can no longer avoid. Move in tighter and create a dangerous situation, or hold their line and admit without saying a word that the attempt to block the formation is starting to fail. Then comes the pause, and that pause says more than any radio message could. In gray zone confrontations, the first side to hesitate is often the side that has started calculating the price of the next move. Venezuela is beginning to understand that ships, silence, and positioning are not enough. Not against a carrier strike group that has already made one thing clear: it is not changing course. What happens next will decide whether this moment ends as simple posturing or becomes a lesson no one on those ships forgets. At 06:41 local time, the situation reaches its most sensitive point. The Venezuelan vessels are now well inside visual range. Hull numbers can be read clearly. Bridge crews can be seen. Through stabilized optics, even small movements on deck are being followed in real time. And still, everything remains controlled. No one rushes. No one makes a dramatic move. No one gives the other side the reaction it is looking for. This is where discipline matters most. Inside the U.S. formation, command teams shift from reading the situation to managing it. Not through intimidation, but through control. The goal is no longer just to understand intent. The goal is to reduce risk while keeping both legal and tactical advantage. The carrier strike group holds its speed, it holds its heading, it holds its spacing. Above the water, a helicopter lifts smoothly from the deck. There are no sirens, no spectacle, no unnecessary display. The launch looks routine, but its purpose is clear. The aircraft does not rush toward the Venezuelan ships. It enters a measured orbit, staying well within international law. This is presence, not provocation. From the air, the picture becomes sharper. The helicopter's sensors send live imagery back to the command center. Angles, spacing, deck activity, emissions, everything becomes clearer. The Venezuelan formation is now being observed from the surface, from the air, and across the electromagnetic spectrum. Every movement is time-stamped. Every course change is recorded. Every adjustment becomes part of the record. This is no longer an unclear standoff with room for competing versions of events. It is a fully documented encounter unfolding under continuous observation. The Venezuelan ships respond without speaking. One eases its speed slightly. Another shifts outward, opening the lane by a small margin. These are not withdrawals, but they are not advances either. They are recalculations, and recalculations matter. Blocking tactics depend on confidence. They require commitment. But commitment only works when the next step is clear. Now that clarity is starting to fade. The U.S. posture does not change, and that is the point. The message is impossible to miss. The formation will not turn away. It will not slow down. It will not be pulled into creating a different story. The closer the Venezuelan ships move, the smaller their margin for error becomes. At this range, one poorly timed steering order or one delayed speed adjustment could create a serious incident that no one would be able to explain easily. The risk has shifted. It no longer belongs only to the formation being challenged. It now works against the ships trying to create the block. Inside the Venezuelan group, coordination begins to show strain. One vessel takes a moment too long to match a speed change. Another holds position just slightly longer than it should. These details are tiny, almost invisible to anyone watching casually, but trained observers see them immediately. This is what pressure looks like when it changes direction. For the U.S. Navy, this is the center of gray zone control. Make the other side face the consequences of its own maneuvering without crossing into unnecessary escalation. No extra warnings are issued beyond standard maritime calls. No dramatic gesture is made. No sudden move is offered for cameras or headlines. The carrier strike group simply continues forward, steady and controlled, while the ships in front of it begin to understand that the space they tried to control is slipping out of their hands. No blinding signals, no flare displays, no gestures designed for headlines. Only presence, movement, and a steady refusal to give way. At 0648, the Venezuelan lead ship changes course by a few degrees. Not enough to make it look like it is backing down, but enough to reduce the immediate risk of contact. It is the first visible break in the attempted block. The others follow, not all at once, not dramatically, but inevitably. The arc begins to loosen, the spacing widens. The geometry that had been designed to influence the strike group's movement now starts to fall apart. Overhead, the helicopter holds its orbit, steady and quiet. Cameras continue recording. The evidence continues to build. This is the kind of moment casual observers often miss. There is no spectacle, no dramatic announcement, no sudden turning point that looks obvious from a distance. But the balance has already shifted. The Venezuelan attempt to control the space without openly escalating has met a formation that understands timing, optics, discipline, and maritime law better than it understands intimidation. The carrier strike group keeps moving forward. Not faster, not slower, exactly as planned. Because the real strength on display is not the ability to act first. It is the ability to make the other side realize that losing control of the situation can happen without a single dramatic moment. And Venezuela is beginning to understand that this encounter is no longer unfolding on its terms. What remains now is the aftermath, and that is where the mistake becomes impossible to ignore. By 6:56 local time, the outcome is clear. What began as a coordinated attempt to block the formation has lost its shape. The Venezuelan vessels are still there, still visible, still present on the surface picture, but they are no longer moving as one. The arc that once tried to limit the strike group's path now has gaps in it. Small ones at first, then wider ones. This is how gray zone pressure collapses. Not through open confrontation, but through exposure. The U.S. carrier strike group continues along its original track, passing through the very space the block was meant to deny. Its movement is steady, deliberate, and impossible to misread. No deviation, no hesitation, no concession. From the bridge, the message is silent but absolute. Overhead, the helicopter adjusts its orbit to keep continuous coverage as the formation changes. Sensors remain active, cameras stay locked on. The encounter is still being documented from multiple angles and across multiple domains. Below, the Venezuelan ships begin making defensive adjustments. One reduces speed again, falling back from the forward position it had tried to hold. Another opens lateral separation, creating a visible lane as the strike group advances. A third remains in place for a moment, unsure whether to continue pressing or begin moving away. There is no unified response, and that is the cost of trying to control a situation without the commitment to carry it through. A blocking maneuver only works when every unit holds the line. Once one ship gives up space, the illusion begins to break. The formation no longer applies pressure, it absorbs it. Then, at last, the radio silence ends. A Venezuelan transmission comes through, formal and restrained. It refers to sovereign patrol activity near national waters. It asks for awareness, but it does not demand a course change. It does not continue the earlier silence. It does not raise the pressure. It sounds less like a challenge and more like an explanation. The U.S. response is brief, professional, and procedural. It restates that the formation is conducting lawful transit through international waters. It notes that all movements are being recorded. It offers no concessions and asks for none. The exchange is recorded in the log. At sea, posture often says more than any message over the radio. The carrier strike group continues ahead, now clearly moving beyond the Venezuelan formation. The closest point of approach begins to widen. The risk starts to fade. The pressure that once seemed directed at the U.S. formation has now turned back on the ships that created it. For Venezuela, this is the moment the reality becomes clear. They did not force a turn. They did not slow the formation. They did not gain control of the route. Instead, they revealed their method. Every course change had been watched, every pause had been recorded, every small adjustment had been time-stamped. In trying to prove presence, they gave away something far more valuable: predictability. The helicopter begins its return path, rising slightly and widening its orbit as the situation settles. It does not rush back. It does not perform any kind of display. There is no celebration, no signal of victory, only the quiet completion of a task. On the surface, the Venezuelan ships spread farther apart, shifting back into a pattern that looks more like observation than obstruction. The risk of close contact has passed. The attempt to influence movement has failed. From this point on, the encounter is effectively over, but its consequences are not. What remains is a detailed record of intent, not based on statements, but on actions. A record of coordination under pressure. A record of a calculated attempt to challenge a carrier strike group while staying below the line of open confrontation. And that record will travel far beyond the horizon. For the U.S. Navy, this was never a contest to dramatize. It was a situation to manage. The objective was achieved the moment the formation passed through without changing course. For Venezuela, the cost is less visible, but more lasting. They chose the timing carefully. They chose their positions deliberately. They used silence as leverage, and by doing that, they showed exactly how far they were willing to go and where they were not willing to go any further. That is the real mistake. In modern naval encounters, the side that reveals its limits without achieving its goal does more than lose the moment. It teaches the other side how to handle the next one. And the next encounter will not begin with uncertainty. It will begin with lessons already learned. By 7:12 local time, the sea has returned to its quiet routine. The Venezuelan ships remain on the horizon, now separated by distance and doubt. The carrier strike group continues along its planned route, unchanged in speed, heading, and posture. To an untrained observer, it may look like nothing happened. But in naval operations, outcomes are not measured by spectacle. They are measured by what was learned. Venezuela's mistake was not simply tactical pressure, it was strategic miscalculation. They tried to influence a carrier strike group without fully committing to the consequences of that move. They relied on geometry, distance, and silence to create pressure, assuming that restraint would look like hesitation. It did not. Instead, restraint became control. Every part of the encounter began working against Venezuela the moment the U.S. formation refused to adjust. Blocking tactics only succeed when the target accepts the pressure mentally. When that never happens, the pressure turns inward, and that is exactly what unfolded. From a strategic point of view, Venezuela gained nothing. The carrier strike group did not divert. It did not slow. It did not acknowledge the attempted block beyond routine maritime procedure. There was no image of retreat, no footage of uncertainty, no narrative advantage. What Venezuela did gain was exposure. Their maneuvering habits were revealed. Their coordination limits were tested. Their tolerance for risk was observed in real time. And all of it was documented. This is the part that rarely reaches the headlines. Modern naval encounters are not only about ships and engines. They are about data, patterns, timing, responses, and command discipline under stress. And Venezuela gave away all of that without receiving a single concession in return. For the U.S. Navy, the encounter reinforced a principle shaped over decades: control through discipline. By maintaining course, speed, and lawful posture, the strike group denied the other side the reaction it was trying to create. A quiet ending does not mean no one lost ground. In many modern encounters, that is exactly how losses are recorded: quietly, internally, and permanently. The Venezuelan ships eventually stepped back without incident, but they left behind a complete operational signature: how they form, how they narrow space, how long they maintain pressure, how quickly risk begins to outweigh intent. These are not small details, they are measurements, and measurements shape future decisions. The timing made the miscalculation even sharper. New Year's Day was likely meant to strengthen the signal, a symbolic moment when readiness might be assumed to be lower. Instead, it showed the opposite. Discipline does not take holidays. Posture does not depend on the calendar. For viewers watching later, the encounter may seem controlled, even anticlimactic, but for professionals, it was decisive. Because one of the most dangerous assumptions in gray zone operations is believing that restraint means uncertainty. In reality, restraint backed by capability is often the clearest sign of control. Venezuela tried to create leverage without pushing too far. The U.S. Navy answered by denying that leverage completely. That is why this was a mistake. Not because it failed loudly, because it failed cleanly. No dramatic incident to point to. No moment to rally around, no reason to rewrite the outcome afterward. Just a carrier strike group that continued exactly where it intended to go. And 5 ships that learned, in silence, that proximity alone is not power. As the horizon closes behind them, one truth remains. In modern naval operations, the side that stays calm is not always unsure. Sometimes it is simply waiting. And the next encounter will begin with everything learned from this one.